Chapter 8, Bomb Blast. From Baffled to Fight Better by Oswald Chambers. Dated 1917. Job chapter 11. Number 1, Stirring of Self-Respecting Indignation. Job 5, verses 1 through 4. Zophar is manifesting the linguistic characteristic of Job. He begins by accusing Job of a multitude of words, thus blinding his own mind to the point at stake. Notice sometimes if we are annoyed with someone how uncomfortably conscious we are, that there is an element in him which we cannot reach. And rather than allow the recognition of that element, we will work ourselves up into self-respecting indignation. Zophar has come to the conclusion that Job is wrong, his creed is wrong, and I alone am justified. This trick of stirring up self-respecting indignation is a very common subterfuge, where we are embarrassed by a problem involving our self-respect. The temptation comes to yield to the bombastic mood, and we use terms of self-righteous indignation to condemn the thing we are not guilty of, whilst all the time we may be guilty of tenfold worse. Number 2, schemes of spurious invocation. Job chapter 5, verses 5 through 10. Another trick of bombastic religion is to appeal to God in order to back up a position which is entirely questionable. Zophar calls God in here as an ally of his own in his attack on Job. We do this in our way of praying. Our invocations and iteration are often false emotions. They do not spring spontaneously. We say in prayer what we ought to say, not that which is actually natural for us to say. The majority of us do not pray. We mouth dictation before God. It may sound very interesting and noble, but it is not our own. It is mere sounding brass and clanking cymbals. There is no reality in it. During the war, it has been easy to stir up self-respecting indignation. It is being aroused now on respectable ethical issues, such as the drink question, etc. Footnote from the reader. He's talking about World War I and the abolishing of alcohol. End of footnote. The elemental issues which are being aroused by suffering are far grander and more wonderful, but they are lost sight of by those of us who are obstinately religious. We do not see them any more than Zophar saw with the situation lie with Job, and the condition of things in organized church at home is the result. The pre-war evangelism is looking to its laurels rather than to its source. Another form of the same spiritual invocation is that which affects the idea that God is punishing our nation for certain wrongs instead of feeling the presence of something much more profound. When we are facing problems, we must see that we are reverent and silent for the most part with what as yet we do not understand. The invocation of God is an operation of the finest spiritual mood, and we are very rarely in a sufficiently exalted state of mind to exercise it. To invocate on the assumption that we know God comes near to blasphemy. Number 3, self-consciousness of serious instruction. Job chapter 5, verses 11 through 15. Zophar tries to instruct Job on a basis which is entirely false, and in Job 5:12, he declares that Job will never get wisdom. This is the length Zophar reaches in dealing with a man who towers leads above him. First he stirs up self-respecting indignation. Then he takes a religious turn. Then a turn of instruction. A turn that puts the wrong self on the top at once. The characteristic of this kind of instruction is that it is self-conscious. The most valuable instruction in our moral life rarely comes from people who are consciously instruct us, for we are not taught in moral life as we are in intellectual life. Confusion always results when we take the method of instruction used in intellectual life and adapt it to our moral life and make certain people moral instructors. It is an abortion for any human being to dare to put himself in the position of a moral superior to another man, as Zophar did to Job. No man is consciously a moral superior to another man. If he is superior intellectually, that is a matter of upbringing. The real basis of moral instruction lies much further down, viz. in God, and God instructs us on the line that is symbolized by the Christian sacrament, which means the real presence of God being conveyed through the common elements. In the spiritual instruction of a man, God uses children and books and flowers. Seldom does he use the self-conscious prick who consciously instructs. The Zophar type has reoccurred all through the Christian centuries, the man who assumes he knows, and frequently the average man is led to say, if experts in spiritual matters do not know these things, who am I that I should? There are no experts in spiritual matters, such as there are no scientific matters. The spiritual expert is described in Matthew chapter 18, verse 4. Whosoever shall humble himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. The spiritual expert is never consciously an expert, because the very nature of spiritual instruction is that it is unconscious of itself. It is the life of a child manifesting obedience and not obstination. Number 4, self-complacency of sentimental integrity. Job chapter 5, verse 16 to 20. Zophar is the type of demigod, a man who rules with his tongue. Any kind of absolute creed ends where Zophar ended, on the sentimental line, where things reach a pitch of enthusiastic presentation, which is not based on fact. This line blinds man's thinking by an ecstasy of thought, and enables an orator to awaken human sentiment or sympathy. But in dealing with trouble, it proves a false line. It gives impertinent advice to a man who is broken-hearted. Zophar implies that he knows exactly the kind of integrity which will stand before God and before man. Nowadays, a self-respecting indignation is not on the Zophar line of things, but on the anti-Zophar, for example, the anti-religious. Before the war, it was not religious humbug that was prevalent, but irreligious humbug, when men pretended they were not religious while all the time they secretly were. If you are a religious person of the Zophar type and can work up sufficient indignation religiously, you will come to the certainty that God and you must go together. It is quite impossible for you to be mistaken. Then you will begin to instruct others on the same line, and will inevitably end in placing things in a totally false light.